Welcome to the Pipeline of People podcast, powered by Versorix, the show where boutique firm leaders trade less admin for more advisory. Each week, we unpack the systems, stories, and strategies that help you keep your pipeline full and your people performing at their best. I'm your host, Jaden. Let's dive in. Today, I'm joined by Mark Riggs, founder and CEO of Pemberton Worldwide, a management consultancy built to help marketing and communication agencies maximize top-line growth from their existing clients. Mark, welcome. Could you kick us off with a quick look at your background?
I was in the advertising public relations agency business for about 23 years, mainly working in sports and lifestyle and entertainment. In 2018, I went out on my own and started Pemberton. It was a fortuitous bounce. I had a former colleague who had become the CFO of the Omnicom PR group. And she reached out and was like, hey, some of our young people are really, really good at the art of what they do, but they couldn't grow a piece of business if their life depended on it. I went to New York, did a lunch and learn, shared a couple of philosophies. The CEO at the time, the global CEO of Porter, was sitting in the room, and he pulled me aside and was like, how'd you really do that? How'd you take small accounts and grow them into multi-million-dollar accounts? And so we began a collaboration where I would work with a lot of the young executives, account management, leadership at Porter Novelli. And in a couple of quarters, we uncovered quite a bit of revenue organically. At that time, I went to him and said, listen, this is not a competitive thing. I'm not pitching you against Edelman or Real Chemistry or anybody else. Would you care if I went out and pitched this service, this idea, these philosophies to other agencies? And he told me to go for it. And that's how we got started.
Amazing. I saw in your website that you've done some interesting things like walking the Masai Mara, hiked the Appalachian Trail, found Tommy Lasorda in your backseat.
Yeah.
What's a story that kind of still makes people do a double take?
The story that makes people do a double take is early in my career, I worked on the Slim Jim brand. So I traveled for a couple of summers with Randy, the Macho Man Savage.
Wow.
Wonderful human being, very nice man. He really did talk like that. That was not a put on. We went to Seattle one time for a trade show. It was a lot of the brands that were sold in a certain convenience store. They had all the brands in, their celebrity spokespeople, et cetera, et cetera. And so we show up at this hotel in Seattle, and there was a note left for me at the front desk. I opened this letter, and it was from a young woman who lived in Seattle who claimed to be Andre the Giant's daughter, and that she had never met her father and knew that Randy knew him and wanted to see if she could get some time with Randy to ask her questions about her father. So I go to Randy, I'm like, hey, this young woman claims to be Andre the Giant's illegitimate daughter, right? And he goes, I want nothing to do with that. Didn't want to talk about it. And so we went to the event. While we're there, we're kind of in a green room area, right? And we come out. And I see this woman, she had to be 6'2", 6'3", very tall, a very goth outfit, comes right at us and trying to ask Randy questions. Of course, my job as a young PR guy was to block and divert. So I did that. And then we finally sat down for him to sign autographs, and she was right at the front of the line. And so she wanted to ask him all these questions. And finally he said, listen, I didn't know your dad. We wrestled together, but I didn't really know him. We weren't buddies. But finally, I kind of interjected and was like, okay, this is enough. It's a little hardcore. So we leave, get on a plane, fly back east. About a year later, Jaden, do you remember when the History Channel would run biography? They do a biography on a celebrity. It was like an hour-long program. They do this biography. One night I'm sitting there, and it was the biography of Andre the Giant. So I'm watching. And ironically, I live in North Carolina. So did Andre the Giant. He had a farm in North Carolina. The whole thing goes through the whole show. And then at the end, there's pictures of his funeral in North Carolina, and Randy's in the pictures.
Oh.
So obviously, you don't just go to anybody's funeral. And Randy did not live in North Carolina, so he had to travel for the funeral. So he's there. And then at the very end, Andre the Giant's former manager was talking about how before the giantism kind of took over, he was really a handsome man and kind of a ladies' man. And he says, there's always been these rumors about an illegitimate daughter somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, but no one's ever met her. And I'm like, I've met her.
That's crazy.
I've met her. And so I call Randy and I'm like, dude, are you watching this? And he goes, I told you, brother, I don't want to talk about this. And so whenever I run into people say, what's one of your craziest stories? I always tell them about how Andre the Giant, supposedly daughter, wanted to pick Randy's brain about her dad, and he would have nothing to do with it. But they're both passed now, so I feel easy telling the story. That was a pretty crazy 48 hours flying to Seattle.
I can
being
imagine.
Stalked by this 6'3" woman. I wouldn't leave Randy alone. And then finally seeing that on that program about a year later was pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's a wild story for sure. Anyway, let's get into it. So what I want to walk through today is why agency pricing pressure is forcing a race to the bottom, how firms can reframe growth around organic revenue, not just net new wins, what better pricing and scope practices actually look like, and then how models help leaders shift from firefighting to future-proofing. All right, so you've worked inside some of the top firms and now you advise many more. What first convinced you to step out and build Pemberton?
Well, I live in North Carolina, and at the time, the last agency I was working for, this was pre-pandemic. So I was probably one of the first executives working remotely. And the deal was I could be in New York once a month. But I found myself in New York every day of my life, or in LA, or wherever the opportunity was. It was a great firm. I had a great experience there, but it was creating a situation where I was an absentee father and husband. So I stepped away from it. I'll also tell you that I think there's a level of pretentiousness in the agency business. We think we're smarter than we really are. I don't think it's a complicated thing we do. We help brands and companies sell more of the stuff they sell at the end of the day, whether that's reputation development, brand development, whatever it might be, brand equity. For me, like I said, I had planned on completely stepping away from the agency business, and I kind of got sucked back in because at the end of the day, I'm an agency guy. The approach that we've built here is effective. It works. What I learned early on, Jaden, is that when I first started pitching this idea of organic growth strategy to agency owners, they would all say, we're good at organic growth. We grow organically. What I finally learned to say was, well, of course you are, because somewhere along the way you do great work, and great work gets more work. Right? But none of us bat 1,000. I think you really have got to be intent. You've done the hard work. You've won the business. You've got it in-house. Why not nurture it? Why not teach our people to be proactive problem solvers instead of being reactive? Right? It's the big difference between being a doctor and being a waiter. A waiter takes the order. Lots of times for an agency, a client will walk in and say, a potential client, hey, I need A, B, and C. Great, we do A, B, and C. We're really happy to have that piece of business walk through the door. But what happens is you end up becoming accountable for a plan you didn't write. Yeah. Your team could do award-winning work, but maybe it doesn't move the needle the way the client needs the needle to move. So my joke is, would I ever go to my cardiologist and say, hey, I think I need open heart surgery? And he or she say, yeah, hey, hop up on the table, we'll crack you open and take a look. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. Let's really ask the right questions and get into it and prescribe a pain pill instead of giving people a vitamin. And so it's this idea of really coming at this with a business consulting mindset and being able to impact business, not just vanity metrics. Somewhere along the way, I heard this guy talking, and he said, the number one competitor to professional service firms is your inaction, standing pat, being happy the way things are. And I thought to myself, if I could calculate people's inaction, that might be the thing that gets people's attention. So if you've been to our website, there's the Cost of Inaction calculator. On there, and it asks 4 simple questions of a marketing, PR, advertising firm owner. And if you'll answer those 4 questions, it will tell you how many net new pieces of business you need to win to achieve your top line revenue goal. Because what I've learned is they all want to sell. They all want to cash in and get rewarded for their life's work. And when they realize how many net new pieces of business at the average revenue that they get per client, to get to that goal, and you can lose no clients, you can have no attrition, right? It's an impossibility. So you've got to teach people to expand revenue. And what happens in most mid-size, small firms, even large firms, you've got a handful of rainmakers whose job new business is, right? And then my joke is we have a society of liberal arts majors doing the business, right? And eventually, if you're really good at churning butter, they put you in charge of all the butter churners. And you get to the ADVP level, and then they give you all these business acumen things to be responsible for, and it breaks people. So you either see people go up because they respond well, or you see them go out. So my idea is, why don't we teach them all to grow business? Why don't we teach them the business of the agency? Even working for a holding company, I would add, how do we make money? Don't worry about that. Just go be creative, get results, etc. But what I've learned is when you welcome people in and tell them how we make money, but a privately held firm owner doesn't have to tell anybody about their K1 distributions, and that's their business. But from a top line revenue, what happens to a dollar when it walks through the door in terms of total labor, overhead, and a desired profit margin, right? When somebody taught me that, I'm like, oh, we're actually in business. We're actually here to make money. We pay taxes. Wow. Operational awareness creates observational effectiveness. If I understand how we make money, my antennas go up. You mean I only get raises from new revenue? Yeah. I don't give raises out of the goodness of my heart. So I'll go find some revenue. And the way we do that is it doesn't have to be the hard sell. A lot of people in the marketing, advertising, public relations agency business do not want to accept the fact that they are in sales. You are in sales. If you've ever pitched a media outlet, you've ever pitched a client, you've ever sold an idea, you're in sales. So just embrace it. Clients want you to bring ideas. I had a Fortune 500 brand client early in my career ask me, he goes, why are you guys so aggressive and creative in trying to win my business? And then what you do is like you guys entrench into this fear and trepidation. Like you stop bringing it, and then I have to drag you up the hill and I lead you, and then I have to fire you because I have to go find somebody else who's going to bring it, right? He said, and that whole process with procurement and da-da-da. He said, that's a year from now. I want this to work. He said, so here's the deal, and this is what changed everything for me. He said, as long as you bring me ideas that are on brand, on strategy, and you can articulate some reasonable business benefit, I will always listen. I may not always buy, but I'll always listen, and batting 300 will get you in the Hall of Fame. We took that piece of business and grew it from a $100,000 project to a multi-million-dollar piece of business. He didn't waste his time with things that were just frivolous. We brought him ideas that would help him sell more of what that brand was selling, right? That's the philosophy. The other part, and you hit at the top, is the one thing that I think most professional service firms take for granted is the scope of work. We're so eager to get something signed and start billing. Let's just get it going, right? We write these indefensible scopes, and we use words like ongoing counsel or ongoing creative or as needed. Clients can drive a Mack truck through that. There was a PR firm I started working with earlier on, and their scopes of work said ongoing media relations. That's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You are already misaligned on the expectations of client. Unexpressed expectations are planned resentments. So at some point, you're going to go to them and say, we're doing so much, we need to, increase our fees. And they're going to no. There's no line that you cross. You said ongoing, right? So Instead, you write defensible scopes. We're going to do 5 pieces of content per week. Client, you get 2 rounds of edits. I staff an account based on either how much time, whether you bill time or not, of how much time or FTE it's going to take me to get that work done. And then if all of a sudden I'm constantly over-servicing the business, and I do that across all my accounts, it's like any other household. You got more going out than you got coming in. You're going to be chasing it constantly. The way you start with a client is very indicative of the way it'll grow, because when most firms win a piece of business, they say, we'll think about organic growth later. We'll get to know them, we'll get immersed, we'll cross that bridge later. But I'm like, listen, all you're doing is creating a dynamic where you're going to be an order taker. You're going to bend over backwards just to get to the next thing. Is there any other business where you would let a client or customer walk in and tell you how to run your business? It's like me and my wife going to our favorite Italian restaurant. She always orders penne alla vodka. It's like me getting up and walking back in the kitchen and telling the chef how to make the meal. Like that's ridiculous sounding, right? Yeah. But we let our clients do it to us all the time. So to me, it's about the way you start with them. Writing defensible scopes of work, because a client can't tell if they've crossed the line if you haven't drawn one, right? So if we say we're going to do 5 of something and that we do 6, that's good partnership. I'll do 6. But if I'm consistently doing 10, I've got people and time. And if I can't pay for the time, I can't employ the people to do the work.
Yeah, for sure. And going back to margins,
understanding the total labor, what it costs to employ people, what's our overhead, and hitting a desired profit margin.
Showing people how they make money and defensible scopes when it comes to margin. What are other common blind spots that you see that maybe contribute to margin pressure?
We overservice with services. We do this exercise with our clients where we'll list all their products and services. Let's just say Jaden's running account A, and we'll list all the products and services from that agency, and I'll say, hey, Jaden, I want you to go down and highlight everything we're doing for this client. What blows my mind is more times than not, the agency person will say, I didn't even know we did all these things. And I'm like, how do you upsell and cross-sell services you don't even know exist? You don't even know what problems you can solve, right? The thing that pressures the margins the most is that we overservice with services. The byproduct of that is we're spending too much time on things. We're giving away ideas. Everything we do from a professional services standpoint, generally, and I'm talking about marketing agencies, it's pixie dust. Strategy, ideation, creative. It's not like you and I are walking into a sporting goods store and walking out with some tangible product in our hand. So you have to make the work feel tangible to a client, because they're human beings. They're going to get from you what they can get from you. If you run an indefensible scope, Or even if you have a defensible scope, we're going to do these 5 services. We're innately problem solvers. So if we're not consistently revisiting that scope and honoring the scope, we end up solving additional problems with additional services, and the client comes to expect those things. So to me, is being very clear on what we're going to do for them, what problems are we solving, and making the work feel tangible. What presses on those margins the most is over-servicing, no doubt about it.
And that kind of segues into the core question of today. What are the long-term costs when these firms are stretching their scopes or pricing to land a deal?
There's some easy math. One of my colleagues in the industry, Daryl Salerno, that I heard speak years ago, and he said, listen, if you're on a retainer, which is a dangerous word, by the way, that's one of the dirty words of scope is retainer, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But let's just say you're amortizing the revenue for a client across the year. So they're paying us $20,000 a month, and we're over-servicing to 33%. He said, if you'll do the math on that, you take the 33% divided by 12. Essentially, you're working the last 3 or 4 months of the year for free. I was like, that's an interesting way to look at it. And so when you illustrate that for a firm and say, listen, you're literally working for free from October 15th to the end of the year, things start to click. And so the other piece is when I tell agency owners, you should tell people how you make money, they don't think there's a level of maturity from their employees to hear that message because they're not trained in business. And they think all that revenue is going right in the owner's pocket. In the U.S., that adjusted gross income is taxable at 40% by Uncle Sam. So you need to explain to them how we make the money, but what we're doing with it. We take a lot of that money and reinvest. Right? The owner's on a salary like everybody else, right? And so if you create this dynamic where everyone is rowing the boat, there's some level of accountability, right? Even if you're an entry-level person, right? Think of it as a ladder. If that entry-level person is not doing their job, the person above them has to play down. The person above them has to play. It's a waterfall effect. We need everybody playing up. Just do like Bill Belichick used to say for the Patriots, just do your job. If you'll do your job, everybody can play up. But I think we've got to create parameters and get people to understand that our services, our time, our expertise are of value. And when you give people too much of it, you're giving away product and service. It's real math to get people to understand that you're now working for free if you're over servicing by 30, 35%. And buddy, I'm telling you, I've seen firms that are way higher than that. They're just trying to keep the revenue coming in, right? And so it's a dangerous game to play.
So do you not do retainers then, or do you just make sure that your scope is rock solid?
Here's what I believe. Here's what I was taught. Put the revenue where the work is. So let's just say, for easy math, I have a $120,000 fee budget for my client. So average $10,000 a month, right?
Yep.
I think we've misused the word retainer so much. And we think if I have a retainer, I can forecast revenue. And that is true. I know what's coming, right?
Yep.
But the psychology of that word is if I'm on retainer, the client has this belief of, oh, I can call you up and have you do anything I want you to do, whenever I want you to do it, right? If we're not clear exactly what we're doing for them, defensible scope. If I have a brand new client, we're going to do some primary research, insight development, strategy development, creative, all this stuff in the beginning. We're going to be intense. If I've got amortized revenue, I'm going to overservice from the very beginning. And once I've overserviced, I'm not catching up. We don't call our clients up and say, you know what, I'm overservicing by 30%. I need to take June, July, and August off. We'll pick it up in the fall. What I'm saying is I'll still charge you $120,000, but less heavy up in the front. I've got other skill sets that I need, whether it's planners, researchers, creative. And then once we get into execution mode, the fees will come down and we'll pay for the execution. So it's still the same annual budget. I'm not against a retainer. To me, a retainer is Jaden's going to pay me a certain amount of money for 100 hours a month. You've retained the right to that service and you're going to tell me what you want for that 100 hours, right? Or if I'm in a crisis firm and you're going to pay me a fee every month to retain the right when you need my service, you need my help, when that phone rings, I'm going to answer. If it's in the middle of the night, you've retained the right to that service. I want people to be on a fixed price schedule. I'm going to lay out for you based on our experience. We're going to start with $25 a month. It's going to come down to 15. It's going to come down to 10, and then we're going to execute for 7,500, whatever. I'm going to get it in alignment because I'm going to put the revenue where I have to put the talent. And it's a fixed price schedule. I've fixed the price We've got a schedule. It's a traditional way of saying retainer without saying retainer.
Got it.
Because I think that's a dangerous word when you say, oh, we're on retainer. Well, you could pick up my dry cleaning. And if I say no, because we did talk about how we were going to work together or what the expectations were, I don't pick up dry cleaning. Well, you said you're on retainer. Now we're already having disagreement.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I wouldn't have thought about it like that. But I do have a follow-up kind of challenge to that. A lot of firms and companies don't want to heavy up front. I've actually had people recently where they're willing to reshift all of the numbers and the retainer and rev share to do the complete opposite, minimize the upfront cash outlay. So what do you have to say to that?
The client wants to minimize the upfront.
They're like, we don't have a ton of cash to just dump into this right now. Let's spread out a setup fee across the retainer or increase the revenue share and decrease the retainer so that we can get results without having to put so much cash out up front.
What most professional service firms don't do is help the client understand the cost of opportunity, right? If you want to pay me a smaller fee in the beginning, totally fine. Let's talk about what we can accomplish for that amount of budget. Let's put some actual measured goals, some KPIs against that budget for outputs and outcomes. And then we'll get to the rest of your budget maybe as it becomes available or however you want to spend it. But what most agencies end up doing that is dangerous is saying, I think this is going to be $500,000 worth of work. And the client says, well, I only have $250. And we still say, well, okay, we'll do it for $250. Right now I'm doing $500,000 worth of work for $250,000. My cost of opportunity, the cost of those employees, the cost of those team members, the cost of those resources do not change. So I'm still paying out to pay for that talent to do $250,000 worth of work at $500,000 level.
Well, that's where you adjust the scope.
Right. And so That's what I'm saying is if in the beginning you want to pay us a smaller fee to get going and we're going to ramp up, however you want to spend your dollars, client, and maybe our fiscals don't align and so budget becomes available later. Those things happen. Tell me what you can do and I'll tell you what I can do. But I think if a client's going to say this is the way I'm going to spend my money, it's completely reasonable for an agency to say, okay, well, this is how I'm going to deploy my resources against that revenue because I'm in business too. Yep. And I think that's okay for an agency to say to a client, I'm in business too, right? Because, it's like we're embarrassed that we make money. It's okay, because if you'll ask a client in the beginning, there's three important questions I think you ask a new client. And the first one is, do you want us to be order takers or do you want us to be counselors? Let's just cut to the chase. I just want clarity of mission. If you want us to be order takers, I'll staff it that way. If you want us to be counselors, I'll staff it a different way. That's the first question. Second question, if they say, yes, we want you to be counselors. Okay, great. Tell me how the story ends. Not what are your KPIs, not what are the metrics. How does the story end? Or how do you want this year to end differently than last year? Whatever the scenario, right? I want the client to speak to me in narrative. We want to move 100,000 cases of this. We want to blah, 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 blah. Okay, great. You're going to move all this product or you're going to sell this thing. What are your margins on that? 50%. That's awesome. I'm only trying to make 20% margin. It's context. They tell me how the story's going to end, and then I say, okay, great. Are you going to hold us accountable to that outcome? Yeah, I'm paying you. Okay, great. Then let me tell you how this goes, right? And to some degree, not that bluntly, but I want to set a dynamic that I'm actually here to help you. I want to do what's best for you. You've come to me for a level of expertise. If you want to do it your way, why don't you just build an internal team? Why don't you just keep the work yourself, right? If you're coming to me for my expertise, there's tens of thousands of firms out there. Let me tell you how we do it, why we're good, why you've come to us, why you've awarded the business to us. And so I think, again, it goes back to how you want to spend your money. If you want to start slow, totally fine. But just understand this is the way we're going to staff it and what we can do in the beginning. And then as the revenue becomes available, we'll ramp up. So you got to take them on a journey. We're going to section it out. We're going to do this Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, and it's going to grow. That would be a high level thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And I think being that counselor person will benefit everyone involved, and it helps with retention. I feel like they take for granted the order takers. Do this, do that. Okay, great. And now we're done with you. You provided no other value than just the services you provided.
It's transactional, 100%.
Where do you see Pemberton headed over the next 1 to 2 years? New tools, new markets, something else?
Here's my dream. The way we're set up, it's a collective model. It's me and collaborators that I bring in when I need them. I've been comfortable with that. We've gone down the growth path, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and I learned a lot of hard lessons as a business owner. Where I want to see this go is we have the capacity and we do it intentionally. We will work with no more than 5 firms at a time. No more than 5 firms at a time, because that allows us to get immersed in the business, really become familiar, and understand that your agency is different than every other agency, right? You may have some similar DNA, but I want to get familiar with the way you want to make money, the way you want your people to be developed, et cetera, so I can really have an impact. Where my mind has been the last 6 months is how can we take Pemberton from just being a consultant for 4 or 5 agencies at a time and build it into a think tank? How can we impact the industry? And I don't want to go out there and tell anyone how to do public relations or how to do advertising. What I want to do is give more thought to how we future-proof the agency business. Why aren't we hiring more business analysts? Why aren't we hiring more JDs? Why aren't we demanding more business acumen coming out of university? Most people in public relations, in my background, kind of learn from an apprentice model. You get the job and you learn. It's a lot of on-the-job training. For me, what I would love to see Pemberton do is evolve into more of a think tank to impact all firms and bring value, do primary research, insight development, have firms come to us with challenges that would be to the benefit of the industry. Because, Jaden, what I've learned is having worked with multinationals and having worked with a 5-person firm, the challenges are the same.
Yep.
People don't believe me when I say that. The challenges are the same. It's the depth of resource and experience that firm has to bring to bear to solve those problems. I'd love to see Pemberton involved in more of a think tank, generating innovative thoughts and ideas. Over the last 8 years, Pemberton has consulted with more than 150 firms. And the one common thing I see is they're pretty bad at business. They're pretty bad at the business part because that's not how they were trained. They were trained to be really good smart marketers or communicators or creatives, right? And so they get to about 10 employees, $1 million in revenue, and they're like, "Gosh, I'm in business." And then they don't know what to do. They want to eventually exit, but they don't know the path to get there, right? For me, future-proofing with the advent of the tools that are available to us in terms of developing creative and doing tactical things, it can be exciting from an output standpoint. It can be concerning for a younger employee trying to get into our industry because maybe they're not as needed as they were. To me, there needs to be some thought given to how we future-proof and everybody stays in business. How do we continue to grow business? How do we evolve, right? If I think about the Bains and the McKinseys, they start with what is the business problem? Let's solve the business problem. PR firms would say, let's solve the business problem. And then the creative will fall out of that. The news will fall out of that. The content will fall out of that. I think we immediately go into what's the pitch? Let's get the idea in the room and start brainstorming the big idea, right? And I'm speaking in generalities. Not everybody's like that. I'd love to be able to generate constant research on the better way to price your work. When to hire, when to fire, when to use freelancers, the business of what we do. I think I was pretty good at public relations. I wasn't the best. What I have seen is that if you can run a business, you will succeed. And those who don't, they don't. So when I say think tank, making this information available on a subscription basis, make it very, very affordable. There's tens of thousands of firms in this country. It could be $100 a month, a couple $100 a month. It doesn't have to be super expensive. I get that there's other governing bodies providing professional development, but I want a firm to come to us and say, hey, we're seeing this problem. Is everybody else seeing this problem? I have to believe they are. Can you guys look into how we solve this and being a resource for the industry? And so they can focus on running their business and serving their clients, and we'll think about the big issues for them and come back and say, hey, this is something that's good for everybody. Doesn't necessarily give this guy the edge or this guy the edge, but it's going to help everybody. Rising tide lifts all boats. And that's the idea.
Yeah, for sure. It sounds almost like you want to commoditize your services, but I'm wondering if that almost waters down. Only work with 5 clients for a reason so that you can be in depth and tailor everything to them and help them specifically. But if you create almost a product out of your services that's kind of more general, how does that affect the kind of Pemberton brand? Or are you going to do both in parallel?
I believe to build one has to continue to succeed. So working with the 4 or 5 firms at a time has to continue to be successful so we can empower the building the other. But again, I'll be completely candid with you, and we're recording this, and this is my level of frustration. You have firms come to people like us or to other consultancies I say, I've got a problem. I need to change the outcome or the outputs, etc. But then they don't actually want to change. I find it incredibly frustrating. People who are in the client service business, they're some of the worst clients ever. Not too long ago, I was working with a firm, and they were very smart, and they were good at a lot of things, but they came to us for the very specific issue and problem. And every time we would say turn left, they're like, we don't do it that way, or I don't want to do that. Finally, I was like, well, listen, what's the definition of insanity?
Doing the same thing over and respecting a different result.
Right. And so if I can help more people, help the industry that I care a lot about that's been so good to me, I'd rather do that. And rising tide, like I said, lifts all boats, as opposed to beating my head against it. And people can take from it what they want. They can apply it for themselves. And how the think tank would evolve and how we would apply and provide some of that counsel, we would see. But there's a specific plan in place for phase 1 of this. I'm working with very smart collaborators to put this together. And I wanted to benefit everybody, not just 1 or 2 or 3 agencies. I think everybody could benefit for some thought. And to me, a lot of it is predicated on the way we hire, the way we train our people, and the information we're exposing them to. I see a lot of firms, Jade, say, hey, we want to be a flat organization, right? And they think that means we all have the same title, there's no titles. Well, to me, a flat organization means I've got quicker access to the same information. There's a maturity in my organization. I can share everything with people, right? And, oh yeah, you're entry level. You got to earn your stripes and you'll make more money along the way. This is how these things work, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with some transparency and honesty with people. Like, oh, okay, this is what I have to do to accomplish to get to where I need personally. But if we don't continue to evolve the way we do business and run our businesses, it's going to be decided for us. Right? Especially with the advent of AI, it's not just our outputs, it's the way we're running the business and efficiencies and very smart technology. Some of it is very exciting. But I also see some firms out there who are resistant to using it. And here, I can't help you. For me, though, there's a level of frustration on the individual agency level that I could probably avoid by saying, here's all this great information, do with it what you will.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining. It was a fantastic conversation. Where can people connect with you or learn more about Pemberton?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, J. Mark Riggs. Pemberton is on LinkedIn as well, or they can also go to PembertonWorldwide.com. My contact information is on there. But yeah, reach out. To me, I think of agencies as a teaching hospital. You have to constantly continue to learn, teach, and practice. I love it when people reach out, challenge something that I've said, and I never fall in the sword and think I'm right. I think that you have to be welcome to other ideas, just like, you push back on something I said about the retainers, right? I think you've got to be open to those ideas and do what's right for your business, but there are some tried and true things that just can't be denied, and, that's important to realize as well.
All right. Leave a comment or tag us with your biggest takeaway. And until next time, this is the Pipeline and People podcast. Thank you so much for joining.